So you've just done the Gridmaster tutorial, and you're immediately faced with a choice. 3 relics, and you can only pick one. Power Miner, Lumberjack, Animal Wrangler. Now, some people might have you believe that there's a wrong choice here.
Animal Wrangler is a huge bait.
Let's talk about that. Personally, I think the best Gridmaster strategy is to focus on getting as many of these grid tasks completed as quickly as possible, because this is going to scale up your relic and perk buffs far more quickly than you would in a league. But for the purpose of this video, let's just ignore the entire grid for now, take the tiles that we know we have, and chat as if you wanted to make the absolute most out of your tier 1 relic. So let's start with Power Miner. Power Miner seems to be the relic that most people are leaning towards, that or Animal Wrangler. So I'm going to assume that you know what the relics do. I'm going to flash it up on screen now in case you don't. Take a moment to read that, but Power Miner is an incredibly strong early game relic. So with Power Miner, straight out the tutorial, you're going to go and use it over at the Tin and Copper Rocks in Lumbridge Swamp. You're going to have a ton of bronze bars. You're going to move quickly onto iron ore to stock up steel bars, because Power Miner turns iron ore into steel bars. Now, why this is so strong early is because that is an incredible source of GP right there. And GP is quite important. You're going to need a lot of GP. If you end up picking Power Miner, where you start to fall short is not really having good food sources. Fishing becomes a bit of a slog, but you can bypass that with GP. You can buy Karambwans from Karamja. You can buy raw sharks from Piscarilius. So in terms of how I would use Power Miner early if I was to pick it, I would be taking advantage of that gold generation, making a ton of steel items, selling that for GP, making steel knives, using that to kill an ogress to get the combatant perk. From there, you're going to want to look at the high alchemy tile to unlock Production Master, because that's just going to speed things up really quickly. And there are a couple methods to get that 55 requirement for high alch. You could go to Arceus Library. It really wouldn't take long using the books there to get magic XP, or there's the combatant route. And in terms of what you want to put your combatant in, it would be into magic, attack, and the third choice doesn't really matter. But attack is the key one here. You're then going to tick off quests like Vampire Slayer, Waterfall, Fight Arena, and Grand Tree, and that will give you an insane amount of attack experience. Now, I am assuming that combatant is going to give you the XP in your other combatant styles from quest XP rewards, but that's going to get you more than 55 magic. Trust me. So from there, you've got your 55 magic. You've probably made more than enough money through selling steel plate bodies. You go over to Nada or the Champions Guild if you've got the quest point requirement. You get your rune plate legs and you high alch them. There is also the option to buy a bag toolbox hedge from the garden supplier in Falador. This actually low alchs for 40,000 coins, so you don't even really need the high alch requirement. Power Miner is going to get you a ton of money. 100k won't take long to make, and you could go and do that. All of a sudden, within the first hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of playing Gridmaster, you have Production Master, you have Combatant. If you're lucky, you might have minimum potential from killing the Lesser Demon in the Wizard's Tower at this point, but if you don't, at the very least, Power Miner's got you off to a really good start. Of course, there is the biggie that mining just kind of sucks the train, and there are some quests with pretty high mining requirements. Song of the Elves being one of them with a 70 mining requirement. However, we do know that some auto completions of quest lines will be a reward for something in Gridmaster. We don't know if the elf quest line is going to be one of them. If it's not, Power Miner has a really nice benefit there of helping you get to 70 mining. In terms of the smithing levels, I don't see the benefit quite as much because everybody is going to have Production Master, and I will come back to that because Production Master makes up for so many weaknesses that all of these tier 1 relics leave open. I will say you can buy a lot of ores from the blast furnace, so using that Production Master, everyone's going to be able to buy gold ore and train smithing incredibly quickly, not to mention those early game quests that give you insane amounts of smithing XP. Now, in terms of where I see Power Miner falling off is in that mid and late game. I don't really see the benefit, and I know a lot of people will say Amethyst is very good. The problem is Amethyst has incredibly high skilling requirements, and I'm not just talking about mining. Of course, you need a high mining level, but you need an equally high crafting level and fletching level to actually do anything with the Amethyst. And if you're thinking you'll just invest a load of time into grinding to Amethyst, by the point that you actually get there and you've got the crafting or fletching requirement to turn it into ammunition, you're going to get better options through PVM drops like Rune Crossbow enchanted bolts, they already outperform Amethyst in a lot of PvM situations. So all in for Power Miner, I think it has an incredibly strong early game. The mid game is only somewhat relevant if we don't auto-complete quests like Song of the Elves. And the late game, it's only really relevant in a very small handful of situations. Let's move on to Animal Wrangler. As I said, I think this is most people's second consideration, if not tied first with Power Miner, and I can totally see why. I mentioned this in one of my previous videos, but the reason Wrangler was so strong in Leagues was because it gave you a crazy head start for Leagues points. There were a ton of early game tasks, there were some good mid game tasks, it carried you in terms of points. Now again, this isn't Leagues, I'm afraid, so Wrangler doesn't have the same sort of power in the early game as it did in Leagues. I don't think that Wrangler's fishing elements are actually all that useful early on. You can buy a lot of foods, as I previously mentioned, provided you've got GP. You can buy equally strong, if not stronger food than you'll get from Wrangler early on. I think that the most powerful element of Wrangler in the early game is actually the hunter element. So if I was picking Animal Wrangler based on the grid that we currently have, of course this may change, here's what I would do instead. I would probably skip the fishing element altogether. I would do Stronghold of Security for some early GP. I would get some runes. I would try and tick off the Wizard's Tower tile, however, that's totally dependent on the queue. If I couldn't do that, I would still try and get some mage levels while starting off some of the early quests like Vampire Slayer, etc. Do the Varrock Museum, that's going to give you some early hunter levels. I would try and get Combatant from the Ogress kill. I would then do some of those early quests and again split them between attack, magic and ranged, and that way you benefit both in ranged and magic. And then instead of rushing the Alk tile, because Production Master isn't all that useful if you don't have much to produce, I would instead focus on leveling Hunter. I would do Hunter's Rumors for some nice early GP, some nice secondaries that help you train Prayer, that help you train Herblore, that give you Bird's Nest for Sour Brews later on. Then using the money from the Hunter's Rumors loot sacks that probably would have built up a little bit, I would use that to tick off the Alk tile. Then I would move on to catching chins as quickly as possible. Red chins first, onto black chins, completing Monkey Madness 1 and using the tunnels there to go crazy with combat levels. This is going to give you a really strong start if you want to tick off the more PvM focused tiles. You're not going to be as flush for GP as you would be with Power Miner, but realistically, you're going to have food on demand when you eventually decide to use the fishing element of Wrangler. You're going to be set for combat levels to get into the PvM tiles. This is a slightly different approach to picking Power Miner, but is powerful nonetheless. In terms of why I think Wrangler stays more relevant in the mid and late game than Power Miner does, is because you can always fall back on that fishing element. As soon as you've started the Taibo quest, you can just fully AFK Kwam ones, never need to bank, that's really nice. And of course, both the hunter and fishing element are going to give you access to things like anglerfish and moonlight meat, which are the best healing foods in the game. I am fully expecting a thieving relic like dodgy deals or a clue relic that helps you complete clues quicker, but in the event that we don't have that, Wrangler's impling element is incredibly strong for getting clues. Implings will be the best source of clue scrolls outside of any thieving relic. And there's a lot of good stuff locked behind clues. While Wrangler definitely doesn't give you that crazy boost up in the very early game, I think it's a very safe long-term bet and stays pretty relevant throughout the entirety of Gridmaster. Lastly, ladies and gents, but mostly gents, we have Lumberjack. Lumberjack is the only relic that has actually seen a buff since Leagues 5, and that's because you now never fail to light a fire. Not sure that's enough to sell the relic, but let's talk about it nonetheless. The ability to toggle the fire-making and fletching element of Lumberjack is really quite strong. Lumberjack is going to have you cutting and fletching a magic short bow before anyone else has that sort of range power. And of course, while you're training your woodcutting, you're either going to be making a ton of arrow shafts and getting just passive fletching levels, or you can actually decide to toggle that off entirely, save all the logs, turn them into bows, and sell them for GP. So Lumberjack actually can give you a pretty nice leg up for GP early on. And that's how I would use Lumberjack if I were to pick it early. I would get straight to chopping. It won't take long to get to the point where you can fletch willow bows, at which point that's kind of your early GP source, fletching willow bows, selling them to general stores. I would then go down the same early game route of abusing the combatant perk to just get crazy combat levels through quest XP rewards, in ranged, in magic, in attack again. That's going to give you a really strong start and the magic level required to do the high Alk tile, at which point when you've got Production Master, you can kind of go out of your way to buy a ton of feathers from Port Sarim, re-enable the toggling effect on Lumberjack to make arrow shafts, and then everywhere you go, you're zero timing fletching as you run around so that you can work towards that magic short bow spike. Unfortunately, I don't see much of the benefit of the fire making element to this, because once you get to 50 fire making with it, you can just go to Wintertod, probably get comparable XP rates, if not slightly better there. And not to mention the rewards from Wintertod are probably going to be more beneficial than just chopping trees. So I would only really abuse Lumberjack in the early game to get that MSB rush. Once you're kind of over that early game need for progression, I feel like Lumberjack just kind of falls off a cliff, never to be seen again, unfortunately. I don't think it holds up very well in the mid and late game. Again, especially seeing as everyone will have Production Master, so pretty much everyone will be able to zero time fletching as they're running around. Of course, if you're thinking of picking Jacker, don't be discouraged. Ultimately, I'm not trying to put anyone off picking any one of these relics. They're all pretty good in their own right. For me, I'm leaning mostly towards Power Miner or Animal Wrangler. I'm still not sure which one I'm going to pick. It is going to depend ultimately on how the grid looks ahead of release. Now, we do think that from the combatant reveal, that we can just see another tile there in the corner that has a little shark icon on it. Now, if that's just, catch or cook a shark, then we have to assume that the mining and woodcutting equivalents will probably be like adamant ore, or cut and fletch some yew or magic logs, something around there. So either way, the usefulness of these tier 1 relics for ticking off grid tiles is probably going to fall off pretty quickly. I'm probably not going to hammer down my tier 1 relic choice until maybe the day, 2 days before Gridmaster. I hope that's helped in seeing some of the advantages that these tier 1 relics can give you. There is absolutely no clear leader. And I'm so excited for Gridmaster. Obviously, I'm going to be doing playthroughs, we'll be doing live streams. We will be doing videos of the reveals up until release. So if you don't want to miss any of that, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.